Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian, and on today's episode, I have a very special guest to talk to us about one of the most unique and arguably the best blue-white deck we have in cEDH. Welcome, Naestrome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk a little bit about Tameshi.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those who don't know, why are you the expert to come on and talk about Tameshi?
So I've been playing cEDH since March of last year, so 2023. But I've been playing Magic since right before Innistrad came out, the original one. But I've only been playing Tameshi in tournament cEDH.
Yeah,
I've got thousands of games at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I helped alongside DJ Yavamaya and Kaiser create and develop the Tameshi cEDH Discord, which is now up to over 500 people, which is awesome.
That's awesome.
But I've been only playing this deck in events. Last Top Deck season, I was in the top 10 of cEDH players on their leaderboard for their Top Deck Invitational.
Yep.
Taken down a number of events with this, and it is just my pride and joy of a deck that has served me really well so far.
Yeah, man. So yeah, I mean, this is it's not just like to take on, tournament scene with and to make top 10 with any deck is to say one thing, right? But with this deck that historically has been a little scoffed at, right? By some of the more established players, right? So I'm going to read Tameshi out here for our audience, and then we'll kind of go over some of the more intricacies of the deck. I want to remind you that we do cEDH coaching here at Comedian MTG. If you're interested in taking that next step up in your cEDH gaming, find me at comedianmtg@gmail.com or any of the ways in the description down below. Shoot me a message, and I'm super happy to set up a session with you. As I mentioned on the channel, we're working on some ways to make long-term coaching a little bit more accessible for folks. I haven't had all the details ironed out yet because things have been really busy, which I'm super grateful and appreciative of. You all have been amazing, and I've worked on so many cool decks as of late. There's been some super sweet brewing, some super sweet tournament prep. All of it's been really awesome in this new exciting metagame. So if you're interested in taking that next step up, find me at any of those places. So let's read Tameshi. So for 2 and a blue, we have our Azorius commander. That'll come up later. It's a Moonfolk Wizard, 2/3. Whenever one or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card. This ability triggers only once per turn. And then for X and white, you can return a land you control to its owner's hand, immediately proccing the first ability, to return target artifact or enchantment card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So some really cool stuff going on here with this commander, right? We have a little bit of card draw, a little bit of card advantage, a little bit of recursion, a little bit of strip mining yourself over and over again. Some really cool stuff. So what draws somebody to Tameshi as a competitive commander?
So there's a few things about Tameshi that I've really enjoyed that I think make it as strong as it is, both for the enjoyment of playing the deck as well as the actual tournament competitiveness.
Yeah.
I'm going to touch on the tournament side first.
Yeah.
I lovingly call Tameshi Underworld Breach in the command zone. A lot of the time, that's how it feels.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of setup to get going, but most of the time when it's turn 4 or 5 and you cast Tameshi, that's when your opponents start to hit the panic button and they know, okay, we don't have much of a window to interact here. And that's where you get to. Once this resolves, it's kind of Otawara, Beseiju, removal spells, and hope.
Yeah. And that's a pretty attractive description, right? I think for a lot of people, Breach is a good card. I like it in the zone. That sounds pretty sweet.
Absolutely. And I think some of the play pattern stuff where you get to just sort of the nuances of the deck and the things that are really enjoyable about it, you have some of the best inevitability in the format. You get lands every turn. You return the lands to your hand. You're continuing to draw cards off of even your opponents using things like Into the Flood mod, a bounce non-creature permanents, because it's not just yours, it's everybody's. The big one is obviously the combination with Lotus Bloom, which I'm sure we will get to. But that is really our A plus B, so to speak, for the deck, where this is our way to get ahead on mana and post bans without Dockside Extortionist. This is a really, really powerful tool to have, to be able to create a whole lot of mana really quickly out of nowhere. And without having to cast a spell makes this even better.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second, right? So you and I touched base as soon as the bans happened, basically. Not only because I just saw you on Max P's Play to Win podcast, or Play, is it Win?
Win and In.
Winning in podcast. Yeah. Winning in podcast. But then also, you and I were talking, we're like, I think because Kaiser's also a good friend of mine. And
Yep.
so I was like, hey, this deck got way better without a dockside in the format, right? And we was like, yeah, absolutely. So we definitely touched base on that aspect of the deck as well. Like this, artifact and enchantment heavy list definitely has that level of like explosivity now and lack of punishment that dockside was very willing to inflict upon this deck. Whenever I do deck techs here on the channel, I always do kind of like to start with the win conditions. Now with Tameshi, that's a bit more nuanced, I would argue, right? But let's kind of go into this. So we have Black Lotus at home here,
Yep.
right? So Lotus Bloom, obviously, with Tameshi's ability to recur from the yard, if you get a Lotus Bloom in your yard, suddenly it starts to look a lot more like a Black Lotus, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest part about how the wins can get assembled is it is a lot of 3 or 4, sometimes even 5 card combos,
Right,
which
right.
in CEDH are often not the most powerful thing you can do.
Yeah.
However, all of these pieces are so incidental, and the
Right.
opportunity cost to get them into play is so low, with the exception of Lotus Bloom.
Mhm.
It's worth kind of just playing because you're going to have those pieces anyway. And then
Yeah.
Bloom by itself is powerful enough in the deck that even if you don't have it ready for a combo, it's going to open you up to so many other options.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of that with especially some of these more nuanced cEDH decks that are a little bit harder to say. Like even when we look at like Thrasios piles and stuff like that, right? Like every single combo piece is like it does something else, right? That's what one of the successful models that I built Dawnwaker off of was like, oh yeah, every single combo piece is also a value engine, right? And I think we see a lot of that here with Tameshi, whether it might appear so or not at first glance, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Lotus Bloom loops, and I think we can maybe go into those in a little bit more detail later, right?
Mm-hmm.
But needless to say, a bunch of 4 and 5 card combos. Are there any like more explicit like 2-carders that some people can associate with the deck?
Yeah, I mean, you get the ones that are commander agnostic. So you look
Right.
at things like Apple of Isu or Apple of Eden. I always forget the name, but between Apple and Teferi and Displacer Kitten, those are the ones that are pretty straightforward. The 2 kind of namesake cards for combos in the deck are Mind Over Matter and Copy Artifact are the 2 that are kind of synonymous with the deck.
Okay. Cool. So Mind Over Matter, obviously from One Ring fame, but also in this deck providing extra application, right?
Absolutely, yeah. With Tameshi, Mind Over Matter, and 2 artifact lands, you make infinite mana.
Yeah.
And if one of those artifact lands is Ancient Den, you make infinite mana of every color, which then turns into infinite tap effects. So you can tap down everybody else's stuff. If they have a City Brass, you can kill them with it. If we have our Codex Shredder in play, you can mill the table.
Okay.
And so it opens up a lot more layered win cons.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times where this card specifically helps us win if somebody cracks Ranger Captain. We just need to have Lion's Eye Diamond to get it out of our hand, and then we mill everybody out without casting a spell.
It's funny you mentioned that. At last time or maybe I think the first time I saw Kaiser play this deck, I walked over and they were like, yeah, he's winning through a rule of law right now. And Mind Over Matter was just sitting there and just like, just discarding like crazy. Absolutely. Sweet. So obviously very powerful enchantment. Now 6 mana to get down, right? I assume that presents a problem at times.
Yeah, casting this does not feel good, surprisingly enough. When you're casting a non-creature spell for 4 blue pips and 2, it's pretty hard to protect a lot of the time.
Right.
So it's either you're in a situation where everybody's exhausted their interaction already,
Mm-hmm.
or you have a way to put it in your graveyard and then recur with Tameshi, so you don't have to cast it at all.
Mm-hmm.
But usually, when we look at a card like this, the payoff and how it converts into a win most of the time is worth the really expensive mana cost. You can look at this like a Nicol Bolas effect out of Sisay almost.
Absolutely. And you said Mind Over Matter was one outlet. What was the other one you're saying?
Yeah, Copy Artifact is the other.
Oh,
so this one's a little bit less obvious a lot of the time.
Yeah.
People see Mind Over Matter hit the table and they figure out pretty quickly that this is a card that is in the deck to win the game.
Yeah.
Copy Artifact is not one of those. It's very innocuous. For those who don't know Tameshi, we play 3 of the artifact lands. So we play Treasure Vault, Ancient Den, and Seed of the Synod. Those are artifacts that Copy Artifact can copy. The important thing about this is Copy Artifact acts as the land that you bounce to your hand for Tameshi when you're recurring your Lotus Bloom. And so this whole combo involves you casting Copy Artifact to copy your artifact land, tapping that copied artifact land for 1, using Tameshi's ability to return Lotus Bloom or Lion's Eye Diamond into play, returning a copy artifact to your hand. And that nets 1 mana every time.
Yeah.
Once you have infinite mana generated, you can then recur every artifact and enchantment from your graveyard to play. And most of them can help us draw a card, which then lets you draw through your deck. Or
Yeah.
to actually kill the table, extort through blind obedience.
Ah, classic. Yeah. So I mean, that's one of the things I really like about the copy artifact loop is because it already is such a powerful enchantment, right? Able to really provide you with a ton of value as you sort of go through the game and provide a lot of sort of situational, basically, yeah, as I mentioned, value. And then sometimes, it is immediately like, okay, I have one of these lands, let's go, right? Like I'm immediately able to just convert that into now we're going for the win here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty mana efficient too, right? Like you just need a land in play and this 2 mana enchantment and this other 0 drop, which is like super easy to acquire, right? So that's pretty easy to get. And plus, when you have a card like Artificer's Intuition in the deck, which I've happened to have noticed when I've seen people play, this card comes out as a pretty MVP-esque.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the other special things about the copy artifact combo is every time you cast it, you can feed Rhystic Studies and all of this. Yeah. If they Swan Song or Pact or Force of Will it goes to your graveyard, and then you can recur it with Tameshi if you have enough lands to keep doing the combo. So it doesn't matter anyway. So
yeah, basically, win attempts X equals lands available in play, which is pretty fun.
Yeah. Force of Negation and Mind Break Trap have other things to say about that.
Yeah, we don't talk about those.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, sick. No, that's super cool to know too. So I guess any particular call outs at this point where we're talking about sort of like, okay, now we kind of have an idea of how to, honestly, let's walk through one of those wins because they're definitely a little bit more complicated. You know them, you love them. Tales of Adventure Magic is one of the sponsors here at Comedian MTG. ToaMagic.com is where you can order your online singles, and using code Comedian you can get a percentage off your order. ToaMagic.com has a super wide variety of singles available to you, and also you can pick them up at major Magic events. You can order them online, pick them up at events. It's super sweet. ToaMagic.com, they're going to be everywhere. They're always at these great events, and they've been super awesome to work with here on the channel. They have such a wide variety of singles and cards available for you, so go check it out. Yeah, so as we kind of mentioned earlier, right, these are the sort of 3 components we need. The copy artifact, which doesn't have as much flexibility as the other 2 slots, right? And then you can have Lotus Bloom or Lion's Eye Diamond, like we mentioned, and then Seed of the Synod or Ancient Den. And then Treasure Vault doesn't work with this loop unless I'm crazy, right?
It does. Yes.
It does. Okay, cool. So you have 3 replacements for the artifact land, which is pretty sweet, right?
Yep. Very specifically with Treasure Vault, because it only taps for colorless, that produces the generic mana you need to cast the copy artifact. And so you just need to have enough blue and white mana to get started in order for it to work.
That's right. It's the starting process that's a bit clunkier. Okay, yep. Got it. Because I knew there was something a little funky with Treasure Vault in this loop, right? But okay, so in this scenario, right, Lotus Bloom would be in your yard, right? Mm-hmm. You're able to play the copy artifact as a copy of the Seed of the Synod. Obviously, we'd have some other white mana available to be able to kick it off immediately, right? You're able to pick up the copy artifact, get the Lotus Bloom back into play. You draw the card for the first iteration, and now you're able to crack the Lotus Bloom for triple blue, right?
In this case, probably white, just to be able to return it, since the seed's going to produce
yeah, absolutely, triple white. So yeah, we have enough to still play the copy artifact. Makes perfect sense there. We want to be able to activate Tameshi. Right. So now we can play the copy artifact with our remaining mana. Once again, coming in as the seat, we have a bunch of white mana floating, and then we can start doing this on repeat, right? Starting to float that blue, so you can pay for copy artifact, alternating between blue and white, so you're paying for Tameshi and copy artifact appropriately, right? But each time, as you can tell, we are going up a mana, which is pretty sweet. Now, it is worth noting, like as you saw there, right, there is a little bit of mana investment to get things kicked off, right? I like to think that Tameshi and Kinnan are kind of similar in the sense that, like, as pilots, there's like Kinnan and Tameshi math that you start to get to the point where it's second nature, but for a long time, boy, is it not.
Yeah, being able to develop those shortcuts is really important, because what most new Tameshi pilots will do is they will count all of their lands and multiply each of their lands by 3, because that's how much mana Lotus Bloom makes. Forgetting that they have to have a land in play still to use their combo, so they end up bouncing every land to their hand, and then they're like, wait, I don't have a land I can copy with this anymore. And so the math part does take a minute to get used to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit of a crunchier deck, but once again, we did kind of mention earlier, right? Able to win through Ranger Captain at times, not this loop specifically, right? But like able to win through Ranger Captain, able to win through Rule of Law, and also just like a very consistent engine in the zone, right? So like, while there are definitely very real downsides for the deck, there are some real upsides as well, right? So it has that Anala and Sisay thing where it's like, yeah, you got to put some work into decks like these, but at the same time, the payoff's extremely real, right? Yep. for learning about the math, and once again, Kinnan as well. So sweet. All right. So now we talked about let's also showcase that mind over matter combo that we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Sure. This is one too that is a little tricky. If you want to put Artificer's Intuition into play for this combo line, that's going to open up a lot of options.
So hypothetically, we talked about mind over matter a little bit earlier. Let's get that meticulous arc. Did I just delete the?
It's in the graveyard.
Archive? Oh, it's in the graveyard. Okay, yep. Yeah. I was like, where did that go? Okay. So hypothetically, in this mind over matter scenario, right, we have 2 artifact lands. One of them needs to be in hand, correct? To start things off. No,
we need one of them to be in any of the zones for the most part. Because as long as one's in the graveyard or in your hand, you can bounce the other one to your hand and then start the loop. So.
Gotcha. So as long as one is specific, or both are not specifically on the field, then you're all set. Okay, coolio. All right. So in this hypothetical scenario, and even then you can also just like recur a different thing, right, to pick it back up.
So long as you
that's so cool. Target. I love that. Like there's I feel like with this deck, there's no scenarios where you're just like, oh, I've punched myself out of it. You just have so much redundancy as long as Tameshi's out, right?
Absolutely.
All right, sick. Cool. I'm getting excited about this. All right, so we talked about the Seed of the Synod loop and Treasure Vault being a little bit different than the Ancient Den because Ancient Den gives you a little bit of extra benefit, right? Mm-hmm. But let's talk about it with, just the initial loop first, right? So Mind Over Matter says discard a card. You may tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land, right? Okay, so how does this start to yield infinite activations for you?
So the cool thing with Mind Over Matter here is that when you target something, you get to decide on resolution if you're tapping or untapping it. And so deflecting swat is something that people are usually worried about with this. And you don't have to because they can't swat to their own thing for you to untap it. You can just choose to tap it.
Okay, cool.
But with this, that ability means we both get to lock our opponents out and start our loop ourselves. So typically the way that this loop would work is you would tap one artifact land you have in play for mana. So we tap the Seed of the Synod in this case.
Yep.
And then discard the Ancient Den, targeting the Seed of the Synod to untap it.
Yep.
Then you can tap the Meticulous Archive for white, tap the Seed of the Synod for blue again, return the Seed of the Synod to your hand, activating Tameshi, targeting the Ancient Den you just discarded.
All right, so Tameshi will bring it back to the battlefield. Obviously, the first time, as we mentioned before, you'll draw a card for this. It's not really relevant for what we're talking about right now, but okay, so in this scenario, and then a bit of mana, right?
Yeah. So, and then from here, you just continue to target the artifact lands themselves, make all the mana you need. Once you've made infinite white mana specifically, that will pay for the Tameshi activation. And now you can continue the loop and tap down everybody else's permanents. It's a pretty common strategy where you tap down everybody else, untap your Ancient Den, and then move to combat. So they can't actually interact with you anymore.
Got it.
And then from there, you've generated infinite mana, and you need any number of payoffs to convert that. And there's quite a few, which is where Artificer's Intuition.
Right. And once again, it's giving you those infinite Tameshi activations, right? So if you have your Blind Obedience or whatever it might be in the graveyard, you can start like casting things over and over again, looping through there.
The challenge with this, it's different than Copy Artifact. You can't actually get infinite Tameshi activations because you lose the land every time.
Oh, true.
So we do have some unique ways to reset that.
Okay.
Thank you to Modern Horizons 3, specifically the Commander set, for the addition of Talon Gates of Madara.
Ah, love it.
So if we have Artificer's Intuition in play, this is where we get to go pretty nuts. So we've made infinite mana. We have an artifact land in our hand. We can activate Artificer's Intuition to discard an artifact and search our library for an artifact that costs 1 or less. In this case, it's going to be Expedition Map.
Okay.
Expedition Map, if we are not silenced, we can just cast. If we are silenced, we can discard it and then return it.
Hilarious.
And then we activate the map and go search for Talon Gates of Madara.
Yep. Alrighty.
And then at that point, this functions like Copy Artifact for the original Copy Artifact loop with Lotus Bloom, where you pay 4 mana to put it into play, then activate Tameshi and return it to your hand to return an artifact, and then pay 4 mana and put it back into play, and do this over and over and over again.
Oh, that's so funny.
All of your artifacts and enchantments back into play.
Huh.
Once you do that, now we can discard the Seed of the Synod to Artificer's Intuition again and go get Codex Shredder. And so this gives us our infinite land drops. Codex Shredder allows us to mill the table by, instead of tapping or untapping an artifact land whenever you discard it to Mind Over Matter, you untap the Codex Shredder and you manually mill every player out one card at a time.
That's fantastic. Okay, yep. So so the Talon Gates being able to just be picked up and put back down over and over again. Wow, I this is already a card I've said is probably one of the best cards printed this entire year, and to see it also have this insane application in this deck too is just so crazy.
It's great. It plays offense and defense 99% of the time. I'm flashing it in to end step, get rid of a Drannith Magistrate or an opposition agent, or flashing it in to protect Tameshi, so I get to untap with it. It's been an all-star, and especially if I don't have a win ready to go, I can flash it in, phase something out, go to my next turn, return Lotus Bloom, and put it back into my hand.
I find myself sleeving up a lot of crop rotation decks, and so like this card is just absolutely buck wild, and so like I am not surprised at all to hear it's an all-star in this deck. That's fantastic. So are you finding that Codex Shredder is like one of your main untapped win conditions primarily?
It is the only outlet for Mind Over Matter outside of the One Ring. There are, with Talon Gates, it lets you do a little bit more, but that's more about Talon Gates than it is Mind Over Matter. Codex Shredder is the way you actually end the game. It also conveniently, you are also a player you can mill with this. So if I'm not silenced, or maybe it's Ranger Captain, I can mill myself completely once I have Talon Gates in play, then put Blind Obedience back into play, and then put Phyrexian Metamorph into play to copy the artifact land, and since that's a creature spell, you can extort it through Blind Obedience once you have infinite mana and kill the table anyway. So you don't actually need copy artifact at that point.
Okay. Hell yeah. I love that. All right. Sweet. There's so many cool lines with this deck. Sweet. Okay. So these are our primary combos. Obviously, we also talked about like Displacer Kitten Teferi.
Yep.
If you don't know that one, it's a classic, right? You're just picking up artifacts, playing them over and over again, drawing your entire deck, and then you can start to do this nonsense with Tameshi.
Absolutely.
Big shout out to one of our sponsors for today's episode, Pinfinity. Now you're going to be seeing a bunch of awesome images of the Pinfinity pins here on this channel that they were able to send over to me that I'll be giving away to you all. Now, Pinfinity has some amazing, really high quality pins that feature amazing artwork from all throughout Magic, and there is a pin for every occasion. There are so many amazing legendary creatures. They have my favorite Emrakul up there. There's so many super cool pins, and they integrate with AR technology. So if you use the Pinfinity app, you will get some super sweet interactable AR tech on these pins. It is not just a pin with Pinfinity, it is an experience. And using the Pinfinity app, you are blending traditional pin collecting, the pin collecting we know and love that you see everywhere. I mean, people trade these pins all over the place, and it blends them with modern technology that works as an easy to use free app on your phone, which is super sweet. There's also a 20% off code with code Comedian. I am not getting any commission on these because I said, hey, I want my audience to get the most off of their order. So if you use code Comedian, which will be pinned in the comments below, as well as in the description of this video, you can get 20% off your order. It's gonna be super sweet. Go check it out. Pinfinity is super sick. And as I mentioned, wanted to shout a little thank you to everyone out in the audience there. So go check it out. They have those super AR enhanced pins, a lot of great things, amazing product. Super happy to work with Pinfinity, and check it out in the description down below. Okay, so now we get the idea of how we win with this deck, right? How do you get there? Like to that point.
We draw as many cards as we are allowed to draw.
Okay.
And as we go through the list, you will see a theme.
Yeah.
I am playing almost every draw engine you can possibly put into the deck. So we've got Archivist of Ogma and Fairy Mastermind and Esper Sentinel for the creature package.
Sweet.
We have the One Ring. We have little cantrip bauble pieces with things like Aether Spellbomb and Vexing Bauble.
I have seen so many Tameshis just bauble loop people, and it's just like, it reminds me a lot of when I was playing Silas Dargo. Very much a similar energy of just like, all right, we're doing this until I draw something that helps.
There's been a number of times where I have everything I need except for one piece, and I can draw 2 or 3 cards with Tameshi and Aether Spellbomb, and we get there. And then we go to the enchantment section. I am playing Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora, classic. As well as Copy Enchantment, Mirror Maid, and Steel Enchantment. We're playing all of them.
Yeah, I've noticed this is a bit of a trend post ban. A lot of people just saying like, "Look, if you're going to play Heuristic Study, so am I."
Absolutely.
And sometimes it says, if I have Heuristic Study, I also have a Heuristic Study.
Yeah, and not only that, because of how Tameshi is worded, if we have a card like Steel Enchantment in our graveyard, it's
Yeah.
an aura,
Yeah.
which is declared on cast. But if you activate Tameshi's ability targeting Steel Enchantment in your graveyard, once that ability resolves, it goes into play attached to an enchantment that is on the field. From what I remember, also including things that you cannot typically target if it's like a hexproof enchantment or something that has Shroud because it comes in attached.
Whoa,
So
that's
people,
crazy.
yes, you can't swap the target of Steel Enchantment from a Tameshi activation. It just comes in and takes it.
Wow,
And
that's pretty nuts, right? Like that kind of is a game changer. Yeah, I mean, if there's any judges out in the chat, please confirm or deny the reality of this statement. But no, that's super sweet. Obviously, like there are going to be niche scenarios where it comes up, but the niche scenarios where it comes up are going to be very good ones, right?
absolutely.
And yeah, people willing to die on the hill for the heuristic studies are going to be sorely disappointed when they find that out.
100%. And we're going to see more of that too, because copying our own Steel Enchantment with Mirror
Yeah.
Maid is something that happens pretty frequently. And with the bans, Amphibian Downpour is now a card that people play. And we, being two colors, get to play Sarah's Sanctum alongside it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that. I mean, I think this is literally one of the first things that Kaiser and I talked about post ban. I was like, are we finally a Sarah Sanctum deck? Is that just finally, do we hit that critical nexus? And I love it. I love the fact that this is finally a cEDH playable card because it's been one of my favorite cards for such a long time.
Oh man, and it is overperformed. There's been a lot of times where we don't have the bloom right away, and we have the piece to go get the bloom, but we have to get it through interaction. And just going and getting a Sarah Sanctum that makes 4 white mana gives us the breathing room we need to be able to fight through interaction.
Pretty damn good, I'm not gonna lie. I love that it works with Urza Saga too. Like, there's just something very funny about that to me.
It's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Usually we'll get 2 activations out of it as well, because you can tap it once it's in play, activate Tameshi to put it back in your hand, and play it again, and then you get sometimes 7 or 8 mana for that.
I was literally just about to ask about that. That's fantastic. Yeah, amazing. Just for example, like pop it for 4, pick it back up, draw a card, play it again, pop it for another 4. Just like, yeah, sure. I mean, 8 white mana can definitely go a long way to helping you win a game.
You can, especially when it's 21 mana after casting an Amphibian Downpour.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that card, because that has been one of the cards that I went from going, oh man, this is so cool, I wish we could play it, to I think this is one of the most underplayed cards in the format right now, and people are still starting to talk about it a lot. I think this card's insane.
Yeah, it's really strong. There's a few cases where it doesn't do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
And those are most often in the realm of Displacer Kitten. If you cast this and Displacer Kitten is one of the targets, it has to be the target of the last copy on the stack. Because if it's the first one, and it's the last, so with this way that Storm would work, if there are 4 copies of Amphibian Downpour on the stack and the bottom one is targeting the Displacer Kitten, you can have the original copies target other creatures, and then before the first copy resolves, you can cast spells and have Displacer Kitten flicker them. So you have to target Displacer Kitten first in order to get the ability removed off of it, and they can start to respond to the targets from that point, but it can get a little bit complicated with fighting through it. And there's a couple of other combo lines that turning it into a 1/1 don't actually help as often as you think.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think well, I mean, they also lose all abilities, right? Which is pretty big.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like for a lot of folks that are kind of looking for, I mean, what it feels like to me is like almost a second Cyclonic Rift in blue decks. It's really, really solid. And especially when you're looking at a format that's now like starting to be dominated by Thrasios and Kinnan and activating your commander over and over again. It's like, oh, hey, what if instead is Frog? Obviously very good against Tameshi as well, but we won't tell him that.
Yeah. Just deflecting SWAT hurts, that's for sure.
Yep. That's very valid. Yeah, we heard it here, folks. So awesome. So like, if you're looking at perhaps like a typical gameplay with this deck, we're really just hyper focusing on those card draw engines, right?
Yeah, okay, that's what we're looking for. So mulligans, we're looking for a draw engine. We're looking for multiple ways to make mana that can get us to a draw engine. Interaction's great, but we play so much of it at this point that you're pretty okay keeping a hand with just an engine because you're likely to draw into interactions
Right.
later.
No, I mean, and I'm so glad you said that because I did just pass by a foil, and I feel like I have to talk about this card.
This has been one of my favorite cards I've added to the deck, and it's recent.
No way.
So this says discard an island and another card, not exile, which means I can discard Mind Over Matter or Lotus Bloom if I draw them during a counter war, which is the biggest pinpoint struggle for the deck is when you draw Lotus Bloom because you can't get it out of your hand a lot of the time.
Right.
On top of that, Tameshi bounces lands to your hands. So I can just activate Tameshi to put an Aether Spellbomb back into play, put a Meticulous Archive into my hand, and then pass the turn with foil up now. We play 6 islands.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny. I didn't even think about the picking up the islands. That's great. Yeah, I genuinely never thought I would see foil outside of like a budget cEDH deck, and so the fact that you're rocking it here is crazy.
And I love it. It's been great.
Any thought to Submerge? I found that card really overperforming in the new meta.
So Submerge is an interesting one to be able to put a creature on top of the library, which is great, especially when we're already on Codex Shredder to be able to mill it. So we get to do some fun little interactions like that.
Yeah.
Submerge requiring your opponents to control, what is it, a forest? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Requiring your opponents to control a forest means that sometimes it doesn't have text on it. Yeah, we're already playing some suboptimal removal pieces because they're synergistic with Tameshi, Portable Hole, Aether Spellbomb, Static Prison.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got a lot of secret removal already. And Submerge is a card that if meta gets to a really creature-heavy spot that we want more of it, I could see that getting added in.
Yeah, I was seeing a lot of the classic suite of free blue and white, and so I was like, maybe I'll throw it out there. Yep. We want to thank one of our sponsors for this episode, Heavy Play. Heavy Play has been an amazing company to partner with. It's been so awesome to get to see the wide array of Heavy Play products. And now, as I mentioned before, they actually have their art mats up on their site. So if you're interested, check out heavyplay.com. And once again, if you use that code comedian to get a percentage off your order, they finally have the magnetic art mats, which are super sweet. This first order is in limited supply. So if you want them, grab them now. They work so well with your deck box, with your dice trays, with all of that stuff. Love the Heavy Play products here on the channel. Once again, use that percentage off with code comedian, and that link is in the description down below. And they also have a Black Friday sale, so if you're interested, you can use code comedian and also get some sweet Black Friday deals over at heavyplay.com. Okay, so what are some cool call outs that you want to highlight maybe in the deck?
Well, all of the other Tameshi pilots would be remiss if I did not give the spotlight to Surveyor's Scope.
Hell yeah.
We have single-handedly influenced the secondary market, and this card is now, as you can see, $5, and it was a year ago, 10 cents. Surveyor's Scope reads, exile Surveyor's Scope after tapping it. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of players who control at least 2 more lands than you. Put those cards onto the battlefield, namely, not tapped, and then shuffle your library.
Oh, true.
So this is, for us, often our Culling Ritual or Dockside. If we have Lotus Bloom in play, we ritual 3 or 4 lands to our hand to make 9 to 12 mana, then activate Surveyor's Scope and go get 3 basic lands into play untapped because we no longer have any lands in play. And that lets us that lets us get 3 more lands in, make more mana, and then start looping and through a lot of the combos. So
that's
often
awesome.
This is a 2 mana artifact that often will help us produce at least 9 mana.
Crazy. It's funny you say the it being so cheap thing, because I remember specifically the first Tameshi list I looked at like forever ago. I was seeing Surveyor Scope in there and I was like, what is this 20-cent card doing in this deck, right? And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Now it is very much not because of that. But yeah, I mean, I've seen this deck obviously has a very abusive relationship with its land drops, and therefore if you can launch them all back to your hand and crank some more back onto the battlefield, some crazy dividends they'll pay off for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even some smaller synergy pieces with things like fetch lands where you can not miss your lands, pass the turn with a fetch land in play, go to your turn, fetch during your turn, hold priority, and activate it. And you have 2 less lands in your opponents a lot of the time.
So true. Right. Yep. Yeah.
You get some play.
Little intricacies like that are pretty sweet. Now, so when you're doing the value generation grind plan, it's getting these card advantage engines up, and then sort of as you approach the critical nexus of value, that's when Tameshi comes out, right? So it's not like a very pro early Tameshi, just jam kind of thing.
Yeah, we talk about some of the like sins of Tameshi, and the biggest one is playing it too early.
Mm-hmm.
Most commander-centric decks use their commander as the engine in order to function. Ob Nixilis, we look at Tayam, things like that. Tameshi is the outlet. We've got lots of little synergistic pieces that we can rely on if we're on a low mulligan or the board state calls for it. But usually Tameshi's not coming down until the turn before or the turn of the combo that we're attempting.
Makes sense. Yeah, I feel like the rest of the deck is the layup, and Tameshi's the slam dunk at the end of the game. Very cool. How about any other highlights that you're hoping to throw out here?
So when we look at how Tameshi's worded and the way that can lead, this deck mulligans really well. So a card like Lion's Eye Diamond is something that can be Jeweled Lotus for us. There's many times where I'll go to 6 or to 5 and I'll keep a hand that has a Lion's Eye Diamond in it, as well as like an artifact land. And then that lets you play a fetch land, go get your Tundra, play the Lion's Eye Diamond, sacrifice it for blue mana to cast Tameshi, discarding the artifact land, and then activate Tameshi, bouncing the Tundra you just fetched before to put the artifact land back into play. And now you're pretty up on tempo a lot of the time.
I mean, then you're one copy artifact away from just winning the game, according to the loop we talked about earlier, right? So
100%.
And so like, for those picking up the deck, right, like despite describing early Tameshi as a cardinal sin, right, we are also hearing scenarios where we are able to break the rule for a significant advancement in our sort of tempo, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this most recent change to the deck has actually come in the lands themselves. We're on a number of utility lands, and a lot of them have some really great synergies. So we get our classics. You get the Minamo, you get Odawara. We're on Sink into Stupor, the MDFC. We have, in our case,
a really cool synergy there too, right? If you're like going into a scenario where there's an uncounterable spell coming down or something like that, right? You can always pick up your Sink on your turn after playing it as a land earlier in the game, which is pretty sweet.
Yep. And usually I'll play these lands first to protect them from wheels and things like that. Often people will put a stacks piece into play and claim, oh, there is a Dothy Voidwalker in play. We are totally safe. And then all I need to do is recur whatever target in my graveyard was there before Dothy came down and bounce my removal spell back to my hand that they can't counter.
Makes sense.
So Talon Gates comes in, but there are 2 lands that do double duty for us. One is Urza's Saga. This is an enchantment. This also works with the Mind Over Matter loops because it is a land that we can return to play. So it works just like the artifact lands do. So we've got 4 targets for that. It finds us many of our combo pieces.
Many cards. Let's highlight a few of those just for some review. Now you can't get the artifact lands with those because the way Urza's Saga is templated, it needs specifically a 0 in the cost or a 1 in the cost. And I know that's a mistake a lot of people make when they first read the card. But that being said, Lion's Eye Diamond, Lotus Petal, Expo Map to get your lands, right?
And that is also the reason you cannot find Lotus Bloom off of it because Lotus Bloom does not have a 0 or a 1.
Of course. Yep.
So, but it finds Lion's Eye Diamond. It finds Expedition Map to then find you that artifact land that you need. It also finds you the outlet to use your infinite mana with Aether Spellbomb. It finds Vexing Bauble, which is really hard for some decks to deal with. And then obviously Grafdigger's Cage if we're not close to our combo turn. But you can treat Urza Saga as a pretty slow value engine a lot of the time just because Tameshi keeps putting it back into play.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I remember the first time I saw someone resolve a Grafdiggers against Tameshi, and they said, "We're good." And I said, "No, that doesn't affect this deck even slightly." And I'm pretty sure they play it. And the pilot just nodded quietly.
There are exactly 2 permanents in the deck that care about Grafdigger's Cage, and those are Phyrexian Metamorph and Esper Sentinel, which don't really matter for us most of the time.
Absolutely not.
The last land that needs its own spotlight is Fomori Vault.
This came
from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This having the ability to discard a card is also enormously relevant. Discarding your Lotus Bloom, discarding your Mind Over Matter. All of these matter quite a bit. And then it gets you a look at usually between 4 and 8 cards. One of the things that we can do with Mind Over Matter is if you do the loop with Treasure Vault and you sacrifice it to turn all of your mana into treasures, Fomori Vault looks at your whole deck.
Fantastic.
Not only does it look at your whole deck, you can then discard a card to Mind Over Matter to untap it and look through your whole deck again. So this lets you trade whatever card is in your hand for whatever you need out of your deck. So it's been a really strong card.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Oh yeah, and also like I guess every time you're pitting something into your hand, you can then discard it to untap the thing because Tameshi just allows you to pick it up out of the graveyard anyways. So it just
Yep.
X equals land drops once again equals the amount of things you can go tutor out of your deck in that situation.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's been pretty remarkable in that case.
Okay, pretty cool. And oh yeah, actually, and then you just go get Talon Gates, and then the problem solves itself, right? And
Yep.
then, oh
100%.
man, oh we're cooking.
Yeah,
This deck's so cool.
has been great. The other thing we can look at too is we're already on Copy Enchantment and Mirror Maid, as well as Phyrexian Metamorph. So we talked earlier about how once you have infinite mana, Phyrexian Metamorph works for Copy Artifact to extort through Blind Obedience.
Mm-hmm.
There are some cases where even without infinite mana, these work like Copy Artifact does.
Okay.
If you clone a Kinnan, your Lotus Bloom now taps for 4 instead of for 3.
Okay.
And so that means when you pay 2 life to Phyrexian Metamorph, you are netting 1 mana and losing 2 life. But if you're extorting through Blind Obedience, you're gaining 3 life. So you're going to gain 3 life and net 1 mana every iteration, or not net any mana, but you're going to make your opponents all lose 1 life every iteration. So it's a mana neutral way to kill your opponents at the table. Mirror Maid obviously works the same way with Kinnan, or Displacer Kitten in this case, because you can just flicker one of your rocks to make more mana if you need to.
Makes sense.
Copy Enchantment can copy Urza's Saga, and that can also work as a way to use the Copy Artifact loop. You just need to have some way to produce more mana every time you cast a spell, whether it's Kinnan, whether it's Displacer Kitten, whether it's like you clone a Bergie and you make an extra red to pay the generic cost that you need. There's so many different ways this deck kind of combos out of nowhere. And
it feels like the deck has that sort of asterisk next to it where it's like, these are your combos and also permutations.
Yeah, all the way
It reminds me a lot of Derevi, right? Like the amount of times I've been like, okay, yeah, you get these untappers. And I was like, and then this works. And I was like, but this 4-card combo works, and this 5-card combo works, and this 5 and 6-card combo works if they have this card, right? Like it's just very much the same aspect of it. It reminds me a lot of that branching path mentality.
Totally. And we get a bunch of other really weird combos. So things like Fairy Mastermind and Smothering Tithe and a clone of Smothering Tithe under a silence draws everybody their deck. Because you get 2 treasures for every card they draw.
Absolutely.
And so you'll get a bunch of mana that way.
Yep.
There's been times in previous iterations where I will copy somebody else's Basalt Monolith and somebody else's Kinnan to make infinite mana, then use Displacer Kitten to flicker the creature clone to then copy the Thrasios and then draw my deck.
Yeah.
So you're really never out of it. We're on Apple, and Apple is an easy way for our artifact tutors to turn into combos a lot of the time. Usually
feels like a big upgrade for this deck, because I think one of the things with Apple is like a lot of the times with Apple in general, like you need to have a deck that can traditionally, not maybe as much for Tameshi, play Apple, crack Apple, and win with someone else's hand with also having invested the 4 into Apple already. Because if you play an Apple and then go past, people are gonna be like, oh, that's gotta not happen, right?
Yep.
But with Tameshi, you can bin Apple at any point and then be like, all right, that Rogside player has 10 cards in hand. They've been getting froggy. Like, let me just steal that from them. Thank you.
Yeah. And it doesn't exile itself either. So one of the outlets we have is after exiling everybody's libraries, we can then go get Apple, put it into play, target one player, put it back into play, target another player, put it back into play, target the last player, and cast one spell out of each of their hands, and then they draw from an empty library and lose.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that before.
Yeah.
That's okay, funny.
It's great, and it works really well with Smothering Tithe too, because they're forced to draw. They don't get to choose, and so you get to make treasures every time they draw a card whenever you cast one of their spells.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like you can also potentially just loop through their deck by casting their stuff over and over again until they hit a win condition, and then you go, all right, cool. It proposes one of my favorite Atali questions, which is always when people ask me how I win with Atali, I go, how do you normally win?
Yeah, exactly. And it's really overperformed. Back in previous iterations before these cards were released, we had things like Hullbreaker Horror, still a very strong win condition. Tameshi works as your outlet for the bounce, because when you return Tameshi to your hand and cast it again, it resets the once per turn draw.
Exactly.
And so then when you cast another mana rock, it bounces to your hand, which triggers Tameshi.
Right.
It is also a 7-mana blue creature in a field full of Red Blast and Pyroblast. That we are not tutoring for. Yeah. So it's one where it's sort of out of the deck for right now. There's a world where it can come back. We used to play Walking Ballista and Heliod. That is something that is no longer something we need to play. We just have better options now.
Which is so funny too, because like even in this deck, like this feels like I'm going to say this about everything for this deck, but like it always goes to, And it's so good because you can just recur it in this deck. You know what I mean? It feels like that's such an engine to the deck. So
Every time.
let's talk about some of the downsides, because I know you've kind of publicly talked about some of the areas of attack on Tameshi. And I think
Mhm.
one of the things that you had mentioned was the sorcery speed being extremely downside to this deck, right?
Yes. We are a slow, grindy deck that wants the game to go long. The way you can break parity on that is by winning at instant speed after generating enough value.
Right.
All of the other slow decks can do it. We can't. If we
Yeah.
wanted to, we'd have to play a bunch of cards to make it work, and it'd just make the plan worse.
Right. Or Hellbreaker Horror. Yeah.
Yep. There are a number of cards that, or a number of games where
Yeah.
the round timer is the thing I have to beat. I don't have to beat my opponents. I've already done that. I just need to do it before the round ends.
Right.
And there's times where I've got 25 cards in my hand. I've got access to 15 plus mana.
Right.
And each player takes 5 minutes on each of their turns to kind of draw it out. And time gets called before they pass, and we draw.
Yeah, they're not certifiably stalling, but they're not stalling either. Yeah, we've all been in that game. Yeah, so that's tough, definitely. And obviously the one that people are going to bring up, I think without hesitation, will be Drannith Magistrate, right? Obviously. Now you did mention a decent amount of main deck answers for Drannith, right? Like especially a number of those enchantment and artifact removal pieces, things like Portable Hole, Static Prison, etc. Right?
Yep.
So do you find that like you've got a lot of pre-baked answers in here. I find myself hesitating to even mention it as an issue, if I'm being realistic.
When we look at things like stacks pieces being problematic for the deck,
right?
What we look at are stacks pieces that take away resources from us. I don't care about things that prevent us from taking game actions. So things like Curse Totem or Drannith, I'm okay with. I'm not losing out on resource. Things like Null Rod or Collector Oof or Rest in Peace, things that don't come up very often. Endurance is another one, where they're removing resources away from us. Our mana, our cards in our graveyard that we have access to. Rule of Law effects, to an extent, can be impactful, but they're usually not, because we're not losing resources. We're just limited on what we're allowed to do.
Right.
But
basically find mind over matter dot deck, right? At that point.
Find mind over matter, start the construct beats plan, just there's a saga and just keep looping it, make more constructs. And
very cool. I think that's like obviously a huge part of this deck too, is like it feels like, and this is what I'm noticing. I'm actually messing around with a lot of stuff in blue white right now, which is like the card draw you get just for signing up to play a blue white commander sort of lets you do, I don't want to say whatever, but kinda, right? Like, and Tameshi sort of attacking on such a preposterous axis of like, sometimes I'm not even going to cast a spell. I'm just going to be like, bounce a land to my hand. This win condition's back on the field. And you're like, well, I just counter that. Stop. Like, and you're not even attacking on the stack a lot of the time too, which is obviously as an opponent vaguely concerning to say the least, right? Has there been any more thought to like extra discard effects? Because I know you've definitely mentioned like stuck in hand being a problem for the deck, right?
Yeah, there's been other iterations of effects that do that. So people like Ledger Shredder is one that has come up in conversation a little bit. It's nice because it prevents you from being attacked, which is the secret way to beat Tameshi players. Is we only play 6 creatures.
Tameshi players,
literally beat us. So discard can be one of those effects that can be impactful. The other thing that can come up too is sometimes the deck can get a little bit pinched on development and holding up interaction at the same time. So I was toying with even something like Unwinding Clock, because we have 3 artifact lands and a bunch of other rocks just to try and break parity on it. You can't take advantage of it in terms of gaining advantage, like with a Thrasios or anything like that.
Of course.
So it's not on the list, but there's a number of kind of pinch scenarios where every pilot has a different thing that they want to play to combat that. But overall, things tend to work well together, and because you can recur everything, there's enough redundancy where you can kind of cover your losses a little bit.
And that is one thing I really like about Tameshi, is that it gives me a bit of the Sisei effect, where like you have access to every artifact and every enchantment that has a niche utility that exists in this format, right? Like each and every one of those, like, I mean, it is very realistic to play Pithing Needle effects and like Disruptor Flute and like a lot of those things, or I mean, like even Static Prison is like an MVP style artifact that's just like this uncommon that, like normally it's a downside that it sacks itself, but in this deck you're like, oh cool, I have recursive control over when this thing comes out, right? I mean, even I've seen Tameshi players in a bad spot just going, oh yeah, my Mystic Grimoire costs X equals 3. No thanks, I'll just bounce this land and get it back, right? Like the ability to be flexible and to play, you know, any number of these enchantments, right? But like just a decent amount that sort of exists throughout Magic. Like I don't know, as like one of the main pilots, do you find it to be that customizable as things go on, or?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think whenever the meta shifts, the deck list changes about 10 cards.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that happens consistently. Our
yeah,
engine is small enough that we
yeah.
don't need the critical density where, oh man,
Right.
I only have like 2 or 3 flex slots. We have quite a few.
Yeah,
And what we'll look at too is some of the political angles that are provided as well. So
yeah,
when we have a meta call, we have a card like Static Prison or Portable Hole, or even like you were talking about recurring the fish.
yeah.
A lot of times they won't counter our spells because they're like, well, if I waste my mental misstep on the Static Prison to protect the Drannith, or not the Drannith, to protect the oh, I don't even know,
Whatever it might be. Yeah,
whatever it is,
yeah,
if to try and protect it, you're just going to put it back into play anyway, and I
hmm,
don't want to lose the interaction piece,
yeah.
and so
Absolutely.
they end up saving it a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah. No, as once again, as a Derevi player, it's I didn't expect Tameshi and Derevi to have so many analogs, but I really do feel like it does, because like I've heard that so many times. They're like, oh yeah, I can blow up Derevi, but he's just going to pay 4 and it's going to be back.
Yep.
You know, and I feel like Tameshi's definitely got a lot of that energy to it too, right? It's such a fascinating commander too, and I was so glad to see like pilots like yourself start to do well with it, because I know like it was actually you know, back when I used to do like deck specific channels in my Discord, it was one of the fastest requested deck channels in the Discord, and then it just sort of petered super
Mhm.
hard. But I noticed yourself and a couple other people really starting to pick it up more and more, and then you started performing quite well with it. You took down, I believe it was the first Mana Vault tournament, right? Was your first like premiere with the deck, I think,
Yeah, it was
feels
their
like.
anniversary event. I we split the
Yeah.
pricing, but it was for a time twister, and so there was
Yes,
86 people.
yes. Very cool, very cool. And I remember that was like what it seemed to me, at least, like not someone who knew you personally at the time. That felt like you're like, here's Naestrome playing
Yep.
Tameshi, and this is the start of your Tameshi arc.
Yeah.
And it was very cool to see that like escalate to like, now this is a deck you are performing very well with, and
Mhm.
consistently over and over again. And now there's a really healthy community around the deck. So, you know, as a prolific Tameshi player, what's the appeal of this deck for you? What is the thing that keeps you playing this deck over and over again?
You know, it is so consistent with the game plan you're trying to enact.
Hmm.
You look at a deck like
Hmm.
Kinnan, sometimes you mold a 3 and you just like kind of die and
Yeah.
you don't have much you can do with that.
Sure, sure.
You look at a deck like Blue Farm and sometimes you get stuck on mana or you draw half your
Yeah.
deck and it's just not the half that wins the game and
Yeah,
you've got
yeah, yeah.
more dudes. Sometimes with Broadside, your Necro on turn 2 gets blown out and then you're sitting there for 4 or 5 turns hoping
Yep.
to draw another piece. Tameshi doesn't have that problem.
Yeah.
Most of the things we're looking for in opening mulligans are cards that Tameshi can put back into play. So if our
Mhm.
plan gets shut down early, it's coming back the next turn or the turn
Yeah.
after, and it's coming back every turn afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that resilience helps a lot. The other one is the look on your opponent's face when you say, I'm going to activate Surveyor Scope. They're like, what does that card do? And then I just get to sit, and while they're all reading my card, I get to do the math for my combo in my head and not waste the clock. And so it's really nice in that case where there's a lot of times your
Yeah.
opponents are, I have the combo on board and I'm manually going through the copy artifact line and they
Yeah.
just don't know it yet. And then it's like iteration 3 or 4 of me demonstrating the loop. They're like, wait, is this a loop? I've already made 5 mana at this point. And then they have the counter spell for the copy artifact. But
Right.
because they let me loop it 3 or 4 times already, I have enough mana to put it back into play and keep going. And that is something that doesn't get old. And no matter how familiar you are with Tameshi,
Yeah.
you're just not going to know the math unless you play the deck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I used to say the same thing about Sisei all the time. But like the worst thing to sit down against as a Sisei player is another Sisei player. And I think Tameshi is much the same, right? If
Yep.
someone can be like, because I remember I was played against it a couple times and I've been like, I'm pretty sure they're about to instigate a loop right now. And I've had a Tameshi ballot literally look at me and be like, no one knows that. Why do you know that right now? You know? It's so funny. But I genuinely think like, even people who do know the loops can still be surprised by like, I mean, even cards in hand and stuff like that, right? And it's always easy to see like, yeah, Blue Farm's about to play a breach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And know that that's a win. But when Tameshi has a land for turn that's secretly killing you, you don't know that yet. Yep. Which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it matters, and usually it's when somebody's like, when somebody does know what's going on, and somebody else goes to Odawara, Tameshi, or a piece that they think is going to matter. They stop and they're like, "Hey, read Odawara again. That doesn't say non-land permanent. That says artifact, enchantment, creature, or planeswalker. You can bounce the artifact land to your hand with copy artifact on the stack, and then there's no longer a land in play, and you've already made your land drop for the turn, and then you're cold stopped."
Yeah.
Those, I think, moments are going to start to pop up a little bit more as the deck continues
Yeah.
to gain popularity. But
Agreed.
there are interaction points for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely not this monolith that like cannot be taken down, right? And we mentioned like some of the weaknesses because, not only playing against it, do you want to know these things, but also like if you plan on piloting it, like I don't want to show up in day one playing Tameshi and then be like, wait a minute, I can't win at instant speed. This is bull. You know what I mean? Like I want to be able to know that ahead of time, right?
Exactly.
So absolutely. This has been super awesome. Thank you for coming down here. Any other particular things you want to shout out before we start to look at wrapping up this deck tech?
Yeah, I mean, I offer coaching for cEDH. I know, comedian, you do as well. Tameshi is one of the main things people come to me for. I've
Absolutely
got a whole host of different things that I do and I offer, politics being another one. So if you're interested in coaching in any form, especially for Tameshi, feel free to reach out on Discord. It's just Naestrome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you want to go to the Tameshi expert and succeed with this fantastic pile of cards, absolutely, definitely a great person to go to. Thank you so much for jumping on today's episode. This is great. And this deck is super, super sweet. I think it's a fantastic experiment and a fantastic show of love from the community with like you find a deck that you enjoy and you put a lot of work into it, and it like every iteration, every tech piece, all of those things. I mean, even talking about Infinite Treasures with Fomori Vault, like all of those pieces for a land that could even look like it's just innocuous and a card advantage piece, right? All that stuff can come up, and it's so fantastic to see a wonderful deck in action. So yeah, thank you once again for jumping on as a guest in this episode. This has been super awesome. I really appreciate it. And yeah, everybody, if y'all have any questions about Tameshi, drop them down in the comments below on this video, and we'll kind of go from there. If there's any other decks also, I know there's some popular cEDH archetypes that could use a breakdown that maybe not have as many resources as this lovely Tameshi will now. Definitely feel free to drop that in the comments below too if there's any other interesting archetypes that y'all are hoping to dive into. I'm super glad we got to finally do this. I've had so many people ask me like, how does Tameshi work, all that kind of stuff, and I think it's I'm glad the deck's going to be able to get a spotlight because it's super sweet. Once again, pilots like yourself have put in a ton of work on it, and yeah, man, you get to play foil. That's sick as hell.
Yep, I love that card.
Sweet, man. Thank you all so much for watching this episode, and I will catch you next time. Peace.